Okay, let's just jump right in. We have to talk about the epidemic. You see the headlines, especially every April. The numbers just keep climbing.
Mhm.
It seems like we went from something like, what, 1 in 150 kids to now it's 1 in 36. In some areas, it's even higher than that.
It's absolutely the dominant narrative in developmental health right now. The curve, it just looks exponential.
Right, and the immediate reaction, the one you hear everywhere, is
Right.
basically panic. Is it something in the water? Is it screens? Are we fundamentally changing as a species?
Mm.
But we've got a paper today that suggests we might be looking at this whole thing completely backward.
It's a very provocative stance. We're doing a deep dive into a paper by Elizabeth Torres, published in the Journal of Personalized Medicine. And she basically argues that this so-called epidemic might not be a biological reality at all.
So it's an artifact of how we label things.
Exactly. It might be an artifact of labeling. She points to this core conflict between, say, psychology, how we watch people behave, and physiology, which is what's actually happening in the body.
So we've made this huge, big tent diagnosis called autism, and it's just so broad now that it's swallowing up all these other specific physical conditions.
Yeah, that's her argument.
Okay, before we get into the really deep science, and there is some fascinating genetic data here, I kind of want to push back on that for a second.
You're for it.
Because if you talk to any teacher, they're not imagining this. Their classrooms are full of kids who are really, truly struggling. So when this paper says the epidemic is an artifact, is she saying these kids' problems aren't real?
No, not at all. The struggle is 100% real. The disability is real. What she's saying is that by lumping them all under this single behavioral label, autism, we're actually missing what's really wrong.
I see.
We might be missing that child A has, a movement disorder, while child B has an autoimmune thing going on, and child C has a sensory processing issue. They're all different.
So we're treating the label, not the actual cause.
That's it. And that's why the mission here, what the paper is arguing for, is a move toward what she calls precision autism.
Okay, so to get there, we have to look at where we are now. How are we even diagnosing this? I think most people assume there's like a blood test or a brain scan, something concrete.
And that's the biggest misconception out there. There are no biomarkers used in a standard diagnosis. It's all behavioral.
All of it.
All of it. We use the DSM-5 criteria and tools like the ADOF, the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule. It's a social test. Does a kid make eye contact? Do they try to share a toy with you?
And this is where Torres points out something about the ADOS that I swear I had to read it 3 times to believe it.
The exclusion criteria.
Yeah. The manual for the ADOS, this gold standard tool, explicitly says it was standardized on children without significant sensory or motor impairments.
It's a huge contradiction, isn't it?
But wait, hang on. If you ask any autistic adult or any parent of an autistic kid, they will tell you sensory and motor stuff it's the #1 daily struggle. The lights are too bright, the tags on their shirt hurt, they can't coordinate their hands to tie their shoes. How can the main diagnostic test just exclude the very symptoms that define the experience for so many people?
It really goes back to the history of the field. Autism has always been sort of owned by psychology and psychiatry, not by neurology. The DSM-5 itself kind of sidelines motor issues. It calls them associated features, like side effects, or it assumes they're caused by medication.
So it's like going to an eye doctor, and they test your vision by asking you to describe a painting, but they just ignore the fact that your eyes are physically swollen shut.
That's a very good analogy. Torres argues we're looking at a hardware problem, a breakdown in the nervous system, but we're diagnosing it and treating it like a software problem, like a refusal to be social.
And because the criteria have gotten so much broader, the tent got bigger, and now we're including all sorts of things. The paper mentions the DSM-5 started allowing comorbidities like ADHD.
Right. And now people with known genetic conditions, cerebral palsy, dystonia, Fragile X, Tourette's, they're increasingly getting the autism label just because they also have social difficulties.
But couldn't that be helpful? A diagnosis gets you services.
It gets you autism services,
Right.
and that's usually behavioral therapy. But if you have cerebral palsy or, say, low muscle tone from a specific gene, behavioral therapy is not going to fix your motor system.
You need physical support.
You need precision medicine.
Okay, so that leads us to the experiment. Because Torres didn't just write an opinion piece. She came with data. She wanted to prove autism isn't its own little island.
Yeah, it was a really clever use of big data, actually. She took 2 huge data sets.
Okay.
First, the SFRA database. That's a list of genes that are strongly linked to autism. Then she took another one, DisGenet, which lists genes linked to a ton of other known disorders. Parkinson's, schizophrenia, ataxia.
So she's basically comparing the autism list to the everything else list.
Exactly. And she used a third tool, the GTEx project. Think of it like a human tissue atlas. It tells you not just which genes you have, but where in the body they're most active. In the heart, the liver, the brain.
So the hypothesis is, if autism is this unique, purely psychological thing, its genetics should look totally different from, say, a physical movement disease.
That's what you'd expect. But it's not what she found, not even close. She found a massive overlap, a compact set of genes, she calls it, shared across all these different disorders.
And this is where it gets really surprising, because the strongest link wasn't to another learning disability, it was to Parkinson's disease.
That's the statistic that just jumps off the page.
Okay, so let's put this in context. When I think Parkinson's, I think of, my grandfather. Tremors, a shuffling walk, it usually starts late in life. The paper says in the general population it's super rare, like 0.09% after age 65.
Right. It's typically a disease of aging.
But Tor has found that in autistic adults, Parkinsonian symptoms show up in 20% of the population.
It's a staggering number.
And not at age 65, by age 40.
1 in 5. And she traces this right back to the genes. Among neurological disorders, Parkinson's shares the single highest percentage of genes with the autism list. 164 shared genes.
That is not a coincidence. That's a biological pathway.
It is. She even points to specific genes like AFF2 and TSC2, which are already linked to early onset Parkinsonism. But the real smoking gun is where these shared genes are active.
The GTEx data.
Yes. They express maximally in the cerebellum and the basal ganglia.
Okay, quick anatomy lesson. What are those?
They're the command centers for movement. The cerebellum handles your coordination, timing, balance, and the basal ganglia is like the go-no-go switch for starting a movement.
So if the genes that are implicated in autism are the same ones that run that go-no-go switch,
then autism is, at its core, a movement disorder.
Wow. That just reframes everything. Because if a child is in class and the teacher says, Johnny, put your book away, and Johnny just sits there.
The teacher sees defiance, a social refusal.
But what if his basal ganglia is misfiring? He might be physically stuck. He wants to move. He heard the command, but the signal isn't getting through.
It's a Parkinsonian freeze, not a behavioral tantrum.
And the more the teacher pushes, the more stressed he gets.
Which just floods his system with cortisol and makes that motor lock even worse.
That is just heartbreaking, but it makes so much sense.
It also lines up with the other big cluster she found, schizophrenia.
Right.
Among the neuropsychiatric disorders, schizophrenia shares the most genes with autism, 336 of them. And we know that schizophrenia has these profound motor components, like catatonia, that we often ignore because we're focused on the hallucinations.
So the computer took all this data and it built a kind of map, a binary tree, she calls it.
Yeah, think of it like a family tree for diseases. The computer just grouped them automatically based on how similar their genes were.
And what did that family reunion look like?
Well, you had two main branches. One was the neuropsychiatric branch. You had autism clustering right next to schizophrenia, ADHD, bipolar. No real surprise there.
Okay, but the other branch?
That was the neurological branch. And this is where you see the physical reality. Autism also had strong ties to Fragile X, the ataxias, and Parkinson's. But then there was a wild card.
This was the part I thought was just stunning. Lupus.
Yes, lupus systemic, an autoimmune disease.
Why on earth is an immune system disorder showing up in a study about autism?
It's a huge clue. They found 114 shared genes. This supports this growing field, neuroimmunology, which suggests for a big subgroup of people, autism might actually be an inflammatory problem.
So the immune system could be attacking or inflaming the nervous system.
Potentially. I mean, we know so many autistic people have GI issues, allergies, skin conditions. The big tent diagnosis just ignores that. It says, oh, your stomach hurts. That's just part of being autistic.
Right.
But the data here suggests, no, you might have an autoimmune profile that's a lot like lupus and that needs anti-inflammatory treatment, not social skills training.
And that's what she means by stratification, breaking the big tent down into lots of smaller, more specific tents.
Exactly. So instead of you have autism, the diagnosis becomes you have a Parkinson's type profile or you have an autoimmune type profile.
But here's the kicker. The paper says current guidelines from a National Academy of Science study actually recommend against this kind of specific testing.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it?
Why? Why would anyone argue against being more specific?
Well, the argument has been that since the treatment, which is almost always applied behavior analysis, or ABA, is the same no matter the cause, we don't need to waste money finding the cause. Torres is pretty scathing about this. She argues this just feeds the autism industrial complex.
It is the very loaded phrase.
It implies there's a profit motive. By keeping the diagnosis vague, you funnel every single person into the same expensive, long-term behavioral therapy pipeline. She even calls it a form of conversion therapy for the nervous system.
Wow. Okay, so let's talk about the alternative, precision autism. If we did this, if we stratified and identified the subtypes, what does that actually let us do?
The most exciting part is something called drug repurposing. We don't have to invent brand new drugs from scratch. We already have pharmacies full of medications approved for other things.
Because of that genetic overlap.
That's it. The paper points to a gene called SLC6A3. It codes for a dopamine transporter protein. We know it's involved in both Parkinson's and ADHD. And we have drugs that target that exact mechanism.
So if you find an autistic kid who has that specific genetic marker, you wouldn't give them some vague autism drug. You'd give them a targeted dopamine medication.
Right. And the goal wouldn't be to cure autism. The goal would be to support the motor system, to help their basal ganglia actually start a movement. I mean, can you imagine how much anxiety would just vanish if your body finally did what you told it to do?
That brings us to the ethical core of this paper. And honestly, this is the part that's really going to stick with me. We have to talk about the potential harm of the current approach.
This is so critical.
If Torres is right, if a huge number of autistic people have a physiological movement disorder, what are we doing when we treat that with behavioral modification?
Just imagine you have a tremor or a stutter, or your body just freezes up and a therapist tells you, look me in the eye, hands quiet, do it again. No, that wasn't right. No reward for you.
You're telling them to run on a broken leg.
You're asking for the impossible. And when they fail, which they physiologically have to, they internalize that failure. Torres argues this constant pressure to perform motor tasks they can't control just leads to profound stress.
And stress isn't just a feeling. It literally changes your brain.
It does. And the paper links this directly to PTSD. And here's the really dark part. The genetic data shows that autism already shares a massive overlap with PTSD genes.
So they're already genetically predisposed to be more sensitive to trauma.
Yes. Their nervous system is already wired to be hyperreactive to threats. And then we put them in a therapy setting that, for some, is basically 40 hours a week of drilling them on their deficits. She's suggesting we are actively creating PTSD in an already vulnerable population.
That could explain the huge mental health crisis we see in autistic adults. The high rates of suicide, depression, burnout. It's not just part of autism. It might be the result of how we treated the autism.
It's the result of treating a hardware problem with a compliance protocol.
So precision autism isn't just about being more efficient. It's about mercy. It's about stopping the damage.
It's about validation. It's about saying, I see that you're trying to move your body and I see that it's hard. That shift alone, from you're acting out to you're stuck, could change everything for a family.
So if we actually adopt this model, what does the future look like? Just genetic testing for everyone?
That's part of it. But Torres also really emphasizes technology. Wearables, we all have them. Apple Watches, Fitbits, biosensors.
Right, tracking our steps, our sleep.
Exactly. She argues we should be using these to track micro movements.
Right.
We shouldn't rely on some guy with a clipboard guessing if a child is getting better. We can literally measure the millisecond timing of a reach. We can quantify the noise in their motor signal.
So we go from subjective observation to objective data.
And if you have data, you can see what actually works. Does this medication reduce the tremor? Does this specific diet improve coordination? We stop guessing.
It really feels like this whole epidemic narrative is just a massive distraction.
It really is. If you stratify the data, that exponential curve just vanishes. You don't have a mysterious tidal wave of broken children. You have a steady, predictable rate of Parkinson's-like conditions, Fragile X-like conditions, autoimmune-like conditions.
And those are manageable. It turns this big, scary monster into a medical chart.
And it gives agency back to the individual. It's not, I am wrong. It's my dopamine transporter is sluggish. That's a problem you can actually work on.
I want to leave everyone with a thought that really hit me when I was reading the section on the classroom. We touched on it with the Johnny freezing example, but just think about the scale of this.
It's huge.
If we accept this data, that autism is largely a movement and sensory disorder, we have to look at our schools in a completely different way. All those kids getting suspended for disruptive behavior or refusal to work.
Or the kids who get labeled aggressive because they flail when their sensory system is overloaded.
Exactly. How many of those behavioral problems are actually just children who are physically trapped inside their own bodies and we're punishing them for it?
It's a very heavy question. If this paper is right, we've fundamentally misunderstood an entire generation of kids.
And if that's the case,
Yeah.
what do we owe them?
We owe them better science. We owe them precision. And frankly, we probably owe them an apology.
A really big one. This has been a lot to take in, but I think it's such a necessary conversation. We have to look past the label.
Always look at the data, not the dogma.
Thanks for diving in with us on this one. We'll see you next time.